Hi, Troy here with SFP Nostalgia Motorsports, and we are back on the 12 bolt today. Today we're going to take a look at my 3 Series carrier that I have. It's a brand new posi unit. I'd like to go over some of the things we have to do before we can trial fit it into the housing. And that would be the carrier bearings. Those need to be pressed on, at least that's the approach I like to take. Some people will do it where they actually heat the bearing and then drop it on, but I prefer to do this method with the press because it also allows me to utilize my cheap shop press that I have. So first thing is, when I install these, I use the shop press with a bearing race and seal driver set, and I find the appropriate puck that will fit on the inner bearing surface, because you don't want the puck to touch the roller cage on the outside because you can damage your bearing. So here I found the correct puck that will allow me to just apply pressure to the interior of the bearing. The issue there is this puck is a flat surface. So it will allow me to drive it down until I contact the flange of the posi unit. And here's the flange of the posi unit. So that flange is actually slightly longer than what the interior width of the bearing is. So that now leaves me with, once I press this down and the puck comes in contact with that inner flange of the carrier, I have approximately 30,000th of an inch that I still need to press that bearing down before it's fully in contact with the flange portion of the differential. So you do want to make sure that you get these fully pressed down. So always pay attention to any interferences that you might have not allowing you to press that bearing fully. So what I will do now is I'll show you exactly what I do when I install these things to remedy that issue without getting more expensive tools. So next I'll be making a couple tools for setup based on bearings. So that's why I like to get another install kit, because I unfortunately could not find the bearings that I've used in the past as the sacrificial bearings for setup. So the cheapest way to go about this is to get another complete kit. One would be for utilizing the interior of the carrier bearing to complete the pressing operation of the carrier bearing, and then the other one would be to utilize the pinion bearing so that you can create a slip fit bearing to make your life a lot easier for doing your setup. So before we do anything, let's get this differential out of the way, because we don't want to have any debris getting inside of it, and I'll show you exactly how I plan to cut this cage to make the pressing tool. Okay, here we have the bearing that we're going to sacrifice in order to assist in pressing the bearing on and getting it fully seated. So again, I don't like using brand new bearings. I usually use used, but I just cannot find where the heck I have them for my 12 bolt. Always use your protective gear when doing this. You're going to be using a cutting wheel, so make sure you're wearing your gloves. Always wear your eye protection, as well as your hearing protection. Now what we're going to be doing is we are going to cut this bearing right between the rollers. So do not cut the rollers, you're wasting your time, you're putting in a lot more effort than you need to. So cut this cage, this would be the bearing cage, the roller cage. Cut it right between the roller. Now we'll go to the other side, do the exact same cut. So here is our makeshift tool that we're going to use to press. So first we're going to clean this thing up because you want it free of all debris, because you're going to be having this setting against a bearing that you're going to be using, so you want to eliminate any chance of debris getting in there. So we're going to shoot it with some carburetor or brake cleaner and go from there. Make sure you throw away all of your junk too, because this stuff can be pretty dangerous if it falls on the floor. Little rollers, they can be a nightmare if you step on them. Alright, here is the inner part of that bearing that we just cut. So you can see where the roller surface is, and the cage would have been around this part. So this is what we're going to use now to press this bearing on the rest of the way. So we're going to pull the bearing race off of there, and let me show you here how this looks on the top. So this is the surface here where the carrier, this is actually part of the carrier, the inner part that you see here. This is where your axles would insert. Here's that inner section of the bearing surface. So we're going to take this bearing, match it up with there, and then that will allow us to press it on the rest of the way. So now we're going to take this whole assembly over to the hydraulic press and press it on the rest of the way. So here we have our carrier set up in our hydraulic press. Here is that inner part of the bearing that we talked about, that we just made actually, that tool we just made. And sometimes you'll have to relieve the inside of the bearing if you're worried about it getting caught on that interior flange there. In this case, I really don't think we have to worry about it, since we're only dealing with maybe about 30,000th of an inch. So we will put that on, and then next we're going to take a wider puck and place it right on top of that. Now we can start in bringing down the hydraulic jack slowly, ever so slowly on this thing. Make sure that your puck or whatever you are trying to press into place is centered. And now we can start bringing this down ever so slowly. Alright, we have the carrier bearings pressed on in place, but it's always a good idea to take a very thin feeler gauge and work your way around it just to make sure that you are indeed fully seated, and we are. That feeler gauge is not getting in there. So we're in good shape here. Now I think would be a good time to go over another aspect of this that can be kind of cumbersome. So the pinion bearing, and in particular the inner pinion bearing, that bearing is pressed. It gets pressed on. It's an interference fit. It gets pressed onto the pinion. Now the problem is you're actually adjusting your pinion depth based on this portion of the pinion. So you're going to have shims in this location. So if you press this bearing into place, then, and you try to establish your pinion depth, and you need more or less shim Now you have to remove that bearing, so it can become very cumbersome constantly pressing it and then also using your press to try to remove that bearing. So we're going to alleviate that issue by making a setup bearing. So this is why this is another reason why I bought that additional kit, because I'm going to use my Dremel in here and just open this surface up just a little bit so that this bearing actually slides on and off. Then I can use this bearing for setup, and then when I establish the correct number of shims in there for my pinion depth, then what I can do is press on the bearing for the final assembly. Alright, so here's our pinion, and you can see this is the orientation of that pinion bearing, and it gets to this point here and it stops. I mean, there is no budging. That's because this is a press fit. So what we're going to have to do is relieve this and turn it into a slip fit. Now we're going to get this pinion out of the way so we don't get it all grimy, but always, once again, gloves, ear protection, eye protection. Perfect. So we were productive today. We actually got our carrier bearings pressed onto the differential thanks to this little tool that we made for allowing us to fully press the bearing onto the carrier. And again, this was made from our additional bearing set that I ended up getting for this project. And then we also made something that is going to save so much time and grief. Our setup bearing for the pinion. So this is so cool. You can buy these also. You could buy these, I believe Ryder Racing makes them, if you don't want to create one for yourself. But for the cost, these are so simple for you to make. I'd advise you with any type of setup tools that you ever make. It doesn't matter what it's for, engine, rear axle, transmission, whatever. Mark them as a setup item. So this one here, I'm going to put some, maybe I'll put yellow paint on or pink paint or something on the one side and label it setup so that you don't confuse it with the final bearing that you're putting in for your final assembly. So I hope this helps everybody out here today. Just some little items that you can do to make your life a lot easier. See you next time. Thank you for watching.